Welcome to the Best Business Podcast. My mission is to help create 200 new multi-millionaire business owners. How? You'll do better when you know better. In my interviews, you'll hear from self-made millionaires, seven-figure business owners, authors, and world-class experts sharing how they did it so you can too without experiencing the same obstacles they did. Now, if you like this interview, please share it with a friend you think will benefit. They'll appreciate it, and I will as well. You can also connect with me on social media. Look for Daryl Urbanski, D-A-R-Y-L, Urban Ski, U-R-B-A-N-S-K-I, and add me so we can be friends. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy what I've prepared for you right here, right now. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Daryl Urbanski, your host as always, and today we are joined by Gleb Tspursky, a well-known scholar, entrepreneur, author, speaker, consultant, and coach who helps leaders plus organizations use science specifically to avoid disaster through science-based strategies for effective decision-making, emotional, and social intelligence. A professor at Ohio State University in the Decision Sciences Collaborative and the History Department, his articles frequently appear in places like Time, Psychology Today, The Conversation, Salon, Leading Change Group, Lifehack, Elite Daily, The Huffington Post, and more. This will be his second interview with us. I know I'm biased, but I do a lot of these interviews, and if you enjoy what you're about to discover, I highly, highly, highly recommend you check out our first interview. If you want to master developing willpower, focus, good mental habits, and better decision-making skills, that was an excellent, excellent call. Today, I've asked Gleb to join us here today to continue that excellent conversation, as well as tell us about his new book, The Truth Seeker's Handbook. So, Gleb, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing fine, Daryl. Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate having my second interview.
Yeah, it was good. It was really timely, too, at the time. I was helping some family, a relative that was actually and my cousins, and they were dealing with some addiction issues in their family, and I'd kind of come in to help them out. And it was really the whole discipline, the behavior changing, the mindset, it was really pertinent at the time. It was very applicable for everyone. I actually sent them a copy of all of it. I tend to do that sometimes if I know people and I do an interview.
Wonderful.
So, and I think it was just powerful stuff. Some of it was just confirming what I already knew, and other things were reinforce or new information, or just updates on things I thought I knew, right? On kind of what's new in those avenues. So why don't you tell us a little bit? You got this new book, The Truth Seeker's Handbook. Can you speak to us a little bit about like what was the motivation for writing it, or did you know you were going to write a book? Did it just kind of come together on its own?
Yeah, so I've been writing a lot of articles on how can we figure out the truth about reality in order to make good decisions to reach our goals. My focus is on making good decisions, but you can't really make good decisions if you don't have the right information. As people say, garbage in, garbage out, right? So one of the things that I do is promote accurate evaluations of reality. How can we avoid the kind of cognitive biases, the kind of biased thinking that inhibits our ability to evaluate reality accurately so that we can make good decisions? So that's stuff I consult about, stuff I speak about, and I've been writing a bunch of articles about this topic. And people have been encouraging me to put them together into a book. So I looked at the articles, edited them, added some new content, and put them together in a book. So it's a book that's been about 4 years in the making, and I'm pleased that it's out. Yeah. So it focuses on how people can evaluate reality accurately, not giving into the biases that typically prevent us from evaluating reality accurately, and instead evaluate reality accurately in all of their life areas, in business, personal life, relationships, charity, politics, civic activities, everything, and then help others around them evaluate reality accurately as well. So that's what the focus of the book is about.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. I mean, I've been through the book, and I think there's some great chapters that are really pertinent to people, really important for people here. Things about how to talk to people, basically how to have difficult conversations. If someone's really set in their ways, how to try to get them to look at the facts despite their intentional biases. And you had already mentioned before at the beginning that we have some biases in our perception that we may or may not be aware of that influence us. Can you go through some of the things? Like I know one from your book was catched patterns. Can you explain what a catched pattern is and some other biases that people may have?
Sure. So the first thing to recognize is why we have them. That's often a question that people ask, why do we have these biases? Well, the reason we have these biases is that we are not evolved for the modern world. We're evolved for the savanna environment. So we have this fight or flight response. where it's, see a saber-toothed tiger, you need to flee from the saber-toothed tiger. You're not going to stand around and think, should I flee from the saber-toothed tiger?
Right.
We are the children of those grandchildren, grandchildren of those people who actually fled from the saber-toothed tiger. We are also, that's a good response. We're also the children of those who, when they came on on some honey from some honeybees, they ate all the honey they could get their hands on. So that was a really good response in the savannah. Now, here in our current environment, we still want to flee from the saber-toothed tiger equivalent. Let's say, get ourselves out of the way of a moving car. That's really healthy. But in our current world, when we have Twinkies and chocolate cake everywhere, available very cheaply, it's a very bad idea to eat all the sugar we can get our hands on. So our gut reactions, our intuitions, are not calibrated well for the modern world. And if people just keep going with their guts, they'll do some things right, like getting out of the way of a moving car, but they'll do some things wrong, like eat all the Twinkies. So not a good idea. So that's the essence of biased thinking, why we have these cognitive biases, because we're not adapted to the modern world. Understanding that, we can see some of the reasons, some of the ways that the patterns that we are using right now are not a good fit for the modern world. So for example, cash patterns, you asked about that. So cash patterns are typical ways of doing things that we have learned from our childhoods and from evolution that we have evolved to think about as appropriate. And that mainly has to do with tribalism. So living in small tribes, that's the savanna environment. We live in small tribes of a few dozen to maybe over 100. And that's the type of mentality that we are used to thinking within, tribal mentality. So who is my tribe, what are my tribe, and so on. And that leads to a whole series of bad decisions, which we can talk about why that leads to bad decisions. So that's one reason. And cash patterns are things that we have learned in our childhoods. So if you're, let me give an example. So my mom, whenever she relaxed, she rested, she used to eat a lot when she relaxed, just as a way of spending her time. And so I learned that from her. And now that's really harming me right now to learn to eat, to avoid eating when I'm relaxing. It's a really difficult thing if you learn that when you're a child. That's one example. Another example from when you're a child, if your family had a lot of interruption going on when people spoke, they jumped all over each other and so on, you learned to interrupt. That was the natural cash pattern for you. However, in a business environment, if you're interrupting people, that's really bad. Makes you look really bad, undermines your social credibility, your social capital. You don't want to do that. But it's really hard to get out of the cash pattern if that's something you learned early onward. So cash patterns can be a combination of evolution, what I mentioned about tribalism, or things that you learned early in your childhood that in your teenage years that are not a good fit for the current world, but you're not noticing. A lot of people who don't have as good social skills as they should, soft skills, in business environments aren't really aware of that. There's really interesting research on emotional intelligence, which is a hugely important area of skills for business. Now, the research shows that that people who have some emotional intelligence and are aware of its importance are really focused a lot on getting more emotional intelligence training, development, because they know how important it is. But people who don't have strong emotional intelligence, they don't really go and get training in emotional intelligence. They ignore that. They think, no, I'm going to get vocational training in whatever thing. And they ignore the importance of emotional intelligence, and that really stumps their career growth because they are not aware that this is a blind spot for them. So that's another example of a cash pattern.
Yeah, so you're talking about the non-cognitive skills there, that just by being smart doesn't guarantee your success at things, because a lot of times to be successful at something, you have to collaborate with other people. And that's where emotional intelligence or just social intelligence are tools that would really help you benefit your I was saying pursuing your cause, but just pushing your idea forward and just achieving it. I mean, we're social creatures. Not all of us work in team environments almost in every facet of our lives. I mean, this is a podcast interview, but it's still a team event between you and I. right? So that's the balance between those, right? And that's where I think a lot of the value of some of the chapters of your book, especially on like collaborating with other people and having those difficult conversations, how to communicate better in your personal and your civic life areas. I think that's a real value tool for that, because all of us, some of us may think that we're really good at it and we may think we're fantastic communicators, but if we were to be put in a lab setting and observed in different scenarios, may find out we actually really suck. And and that's the whole unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you don't know. And then of course the conscious incompetence, where you realize, and like you mentioned, the people who are aware of the importance of these non-cognitive, these emotional intelligence, these social intelligence skills, that they want to develop them more because they're conscious how incompetent they are, and they want to get to a place where they can consciously be competent, so one day they might unconsciously be competent and just naturally have great skills. And that's a level of mastery a lot of people try to strive for. So I guess to pivot this a bit, can you talk about how this impacts I mean, we already kind of mentioned it a little bit, but can you talk about how it applies in a business scenario, and maybe is there any tools that you can give people, like a couple acronyms or something that we can remember to help when we want to, go through these things and we're caught in a cash pattern or some sort of bias that's limiting us? How do we escape our limitations?
Excellent question, and definitely great insights about emotional and social intelligence. With these are things I consult about quite a bit. With emotional intelligence, meaning self-awareness and self-management, awareness of one's own emotions and management of one's own emotions. And social intelligence, meaning awareness of other people's emotions and managing their emotions. So both of these things are really important for addressing the kind of biases that we would tend to see in business environments. And let's get to a common situation. Let's say a hiring situation. So let's say you're deciding to hire someone if you are an employer, or deciding to work with someone if you're a solopreneur or trying to have a business relationship with someone, and you're just evaluating whether the person is trustworthy. That's a really important question. Now, unfortunately, our tribal instincts, our tribal intuitions are just going to lead us astray. This is a really bad area. It's a really bad fit. It's a context. So the first thing to notice when you're evaluating these situations is this a context where my background in the savannah, the gut intuitions, is it going to serve me well, or is it going to serve me poorly? Now, we lived in small tribes where we knew each other for quite well, other tribe members. So if you know someone quite well and have been engaging with them for a long time, you can read cues pretty reasonably. So that's a good place to trust your gut intuitions, your gut reactions. However, if you're establishing a new relationship with someone, that's a really bad place to trust your gut reactions, your intuitions, because that person is not yet part of your tribe. And as within the savannah environment, it was very dangerous to trust strangers. So we have intuitive hostility towards strangers. That's something very dangerous. That's a perception of ours. So this is not a time to trust your gut. And this is a time to know that your intuitions will be off. And specifically, there are two common ways they'll be off. One is called the halo effect, and the other is called the horns effect. The halo effect is where if we like one characteristic of someone, we will intuitively like other aspects of them more than we should. So for example, here I am in Columbus, and I teach at Ohio State. And so it's Buckeyes. So I'm contractually obligated to root for the Buckeyes. So if I know that somebody else went to Ohio State and likes the Buckeyes, I will tend to like them more. Now, does that indicate that they will be a better business collaborator? Does that indicate that there will be a better employee? No, not at all. But intuitively, with my gut reactions, I will tend to overestimate their trustworthiness, their competence in any set of activities in a job. So let's say I'm employing that person, and I'm doing an interview and scoring them on various criteria as they're going through the interview. I will, without recognizing that I'm doing so, this is an unconscious bias. Just because they went to Ohio State and they like the Buckeyes, I will give them higher points on each of these things without realizing I'm doing it. That's the halo effect. The horns effect is the opposite. So if I don't like one aspect of someone, again, without recognizing it in any way, I will give them negative points. So our big rivals up north is Michigan. If they come with some Michigan insignia, I will intuitively, without recognizing it, give them lower points. And again, this is not something I'm trying to do. It's just intuitive. This is the intuition. This is the gut reactions. So this is, of course, the sport rivalry is an innocent example of something much more problematic. Sexism, racism, various ethnicity, religious, cultural, socioeconomic differences that really can get you in trouble if I do a lot of consulting for HR and hiring and so on. And this is one of those big areas where we talk about this as a huge problem. This is a big. So this is a problem. The way to solve this in the context of hiring or deciding who to work with if you're a solopreneur, a really good way is to go against your intuitions deliberately when you're putting numbers on things. So if you notice somebody has some characteristics that you don't like for some reason, maybe their accent is off or something like that, however they're different from you, the more different they are from you, the more additional bonus points you should give them. And the more similar they are to you, the more you should subtract from them to correct for your intuitions. Right. So this is just a corrective exercise. And this relates back to something else without numbers. Numbers are something that wasn't present in the savannah. So if using numbers is something that can really help offset the gut reactions that lead us astray. And so putting numbers on your intuitions and correcting them using bonus points, adding them or subtracting them is going to really help you make more effective decisions to reach your
and I can attest to this.
goals.
I used to hire based doing an interview and asking some questions, and going through to make sure I'm asking the right questions and what their physical income is versus their psychic income, and and their background experiences and how they would handle scenarios. And then I started doing something when I hire people is I started having a spreadsheet where I would come up with 3 to 5 factors or criteria I thought were the most important for that role, whether it was a personality type, like they need to be judging and very analytical, or they have to be super organized, or they have to be very creative, and coming up with these 3 to 5 things that I think need to be there in order for someone to be successful. And then I would rank them and weight how important these criteria are versus other ones. And then I would go through and when reviewing applications before I set up the interview, I would rank them based off the resume that they sent me and the little information that I had, how they've come so far. And then I would update that. I would take the best candidates, if depending how many applicants. I had one where there was like 40 applicants, and after narrowed it down to a group of 5, and then I would do a group interview. And in the group interview, I would then update those, see how I felt, and I would sign a homework task or a sample task to see, how they responded. And the ones that matched the closest to what I thought they were, you know what I mean? Like I tried to get the best picture of it I could. And I did this recording at the point in time of this recording, I did this for the last 2 hires that I did. And I thought they were some of the best hires that I'd done in terms of fit for role. Because the problem that a lot of people have, to speak to your point, is when they want to hire people, when they like someone, often you're hiring someone to do a job that you don't want to do, depending on the size of the company. And so if you hire someone that's just like you, they may not want to do it either. And so that's where you have to understand that in a team, you need every color of the rainbow. You need that, because that's what's going to build a well-diversified team. So just to speak to your point there, I think that's a really powerful tool.
Absolutely.
And we don't even realize the biases we put on things. I mean, they did a test. It was like being introduced to a new person, I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like having a hot drink or a cold drink before meeting a new person, and then being asked to assess them afterwards. And the people who got the hot drinks thought the person was warmer, and all the personality traits we associate with warmness. And the people who got the cold drink associate the person with colder. And that was just the drink that they got, they drank before they met them. So yeah,
sure.
We're definitely.
That's a phenomenon called priming, where we are thinking about something, we had a certain association, and we interpret the situation through that initial association we had. And that's definitely a common psychological phenomenon that causes us to make bad decisions when we're primed to think in certain ways. Absolutely. And that's definitely a good approach to hiring, to put numbers on people and on their criteria and evaluate them that way. You're much more likely to make an effective decision. I would encourage you to also check with you if you like the people in some ways and correct it for liking and also disliking. Again, it doesn't have to be clear liking or disliking. It's just more difference or less difference.
If I notice I prefer
similar.
someone, maybe tone down their scores a little bit by a point or two. Yeah. Because
exactly, because otherwise you intuitively, without recognizing it, you will still give them more points than they deserve. That's just what the research
fair
suggests.
Enough. So I've got a couple other things I want to talk about. One is, again, in dealing with other people, there's a work scenario. There's someone that you're tied to working with them and they just don't see it. Now, I used to do something, but it was very primitive compared to maybe some of the tools you have. I read about this in a book and I started doing it. And it was in a work scenario. I was working with a client 80% of my time for about 8 months. And I would always have a piece of paper in my pocket that said, what if they're right? And that was because, and often I know what's best. What are you talking about? I know what I'm doing. That's why I'm here, And so in the question I want to ask is just some tools or coping mechanisms for anyone that's in that. They're in a close quarter scenario with someone, either tensions might be high or they're feeling really triggered and charged. And there's there's an elephant in the room, so to speak, or there's an issue. How do they evaluate that clearly?
Sure. So there are two kind of things you want to think about, two scenarios that we can do, that we can deal with. One is whether when you're not confident about reality, like really super confident that this is the accurate thing that's going on, then you want to pursue a practice called collaborative truth seeking. So that's one phenomenon. The other approach is when you're you're really confident that something's appropriate and accurate, but the other person seems to clearly deny reality. So let's go through that first. This is actually quite a bit more common than you might think happens. There is a 4-year study by Leadership IQ which found that about 23% of CEOs who get fired did so for denying reality. Basically, the boards of organizations forced out these CEOs because they refused to recognize negative facts about the organization's performance. Now, if the boards would say that, hey, if the CEO was actually recognizing the reality and taking steps to address the situation, that would be great. That would be fine. Not great, but fine. But the problem is these CEOs who were forced out, they just weren't acknowledging this negative situation. And there are lots of reasons why that happens. A common reason is that I've seen a number of CEOs is that they tend to think that just because they're super awesome, the company must be doing really well under them. And so it's a kind of a real blindness, a deep blind spot that they think just because they're talented and they think themselves as talented, therefore things can't go wrong. So again, not true, not the case. The really great people, great CEOs are ones who can recognize negative reality, negative facts about the organization's performance and turn things around. So, but this denialism spreads and is omnipresent throughout lots of organizations, lots of venues, from solopreneurs to small businesses to middle managers to CEOs. So how do you deal with denialism? Well, the research on this topic shows that you don't want to deal with it by giving them the facts, especially if they're your boss. I mean, they have power over you. That's one thing. But even if they're not your boss, even if they're a peer or even a subordinate, you want to be careful, not to damage your interactions and the relationship with them by having arguments and giving them data if they have data, but they just don't realize reality. So the thing that you need to realize is that what's going on is an emotional block. Now, this is something really interesting in companies. Companies tend to treat their employees as if they're robots, as if they're cold, calm, rational robots. Not the case at all. I was working in an organization once for an engineering consulting firm, had about 200 engineers and some HR. And the HR managers, they were trying to motivate the engineers to do some selling as part of their activities. And the engineers would refuse to do selling. And I came in and saw how the HR people were trying to motivate the engineers to do selling. And they were trying to motivate the engineers to do selling by telling the engineers, hey, this is really important for the company that you sell things. And I talked to the HR people and said, well, this is not really emotionally motivating to the engineers to do selling. And they were said, what, engineers have emotions? I mean, they don't present as if they have emotions, but of course they have emotions. So I figured out what are emotional drivers for engineers to motivate them to do selling. In the similar situation, what you need to figure out are what are the emotional blocks that cause people to stick their heads into the sand of reality. So what are they afraid of? Let's say with that CEO who we talked about in the beginning, that CEO might be afraid of being seen as a weak leader because under them, the organization is not doing well. So that might be the cause of them denying reality, flinching away from reality, and refusing to recognize negative information. So, okay, that's fine. Then the next step, and that's the first part of a broader strategy called EGRIP: emotions, goals, rapport, information, positive reinforcement. So you got the emotions. Now you figured out what the CEO is concerned about. Then you go to the goals. You establish shared goals with the CEO. So you talk to the CEO about, hey, we both want the company to do well financially. That's really important. And we want to make sure that you're seen as a strong leader. So that's, establish shared goals. CEO's happy with that. Then you go to rapport, build up rapport, show that you're trustworthy, show that you care about the CEO as a leader, that you care about his status as a leader, that's important to you and the profit of the company. So build up that relationship. Next, you present, that's the third step. Next is the fourth step, information. Here's where you present the information that may not be pleasant to the CEO. So you don't say, hey, this is something that you're not realizing. You say, great leaders are seen as great because they're able to turn their companies around and they're able to change and be flexible in the face of difficult circumstances. And so get the CEO to think differently about what it means to be a great leader. And here's where you can talk about, hey, are there any difficult circumstances right now in the company that might be, you can show your leadership by acknowledging and turning around. And so that would be a good opportunity for the CEO to shift their thinking, reframe their thinking, to orient more toward actually improving the company and not being in denial. And finally, end with P, positive reinforcement. So talk about how great leaders like the CEO it's really important for them to keep up this orientation to always acknowledge reality, even negative reality, and orient toward changing it. So to not have the same sorts of conversations with the CEO in the future. So I go in the book through a couple of examples of how in my consulting practice, I went through these sorts of interactions with middle managers and so on who didn't realize some facts about reality, were denying some facts about reality. And you want to be careful not to come off as condescending. This is one important thing that I want to highlight. And you want to make sure that you have all the data available to you as you make these decisions about how to approach these people in managerial positions.
So can we make this, can we apply this to a real world scenario? Because I have, for example, it's funny you mentioned this. I have a client right now and he's very addicted to doing. He's misunderstanding busyness with productivity. And it's intense. Like it's an intense thing. It's actually a really big pain point with a lot of his team members. In fact, before our interview here, I was a couple minutes late because I was dealing with one of the partners of that business kind of coming to me trying to resolve because there's this guy and like he's if this were high school, we would call him like newness because every day there's something new. Like it's new this thing, new that thing, and he's a fantastic starter but not stopping. So how would we walk through this e-grip for that? Like the emotions, the goals I think would be easy because the goals would be like, look, this is what everyone's trying to accomplish, this is what everyone wants to achieve, this is what everyone's all about. That part, the rapport, I get that. The information, I think I get that part to tie that in. But the emotion part at the beginning, how do you address that? Because I think that, yeah.
Sure. So one of the things I'm hearing, I mean, of course, I need a lot more context, but one of the things I'm hearing is that this person wants to start a lot of new projects and not finish them. Am I hearing that correctly?
He wants them finished by other people. But the reality is they're not all relevant to the 3 goals of the quarter. There's 3 goals this company has for the quarter.
Okay.
But this guy,
They're
yeah.
not a lot of order. Sure. So there are a number of things that might be going on, and what you want to see is what kind of emotional payoff he's getting from starting these projects, and that other people are left to finish or discard. So that tells me that he is getting some sort of emotional or trying to get some sort of emotional payoff from starting these things, because he's excited. He wants to have new projects. There's a certain personality type, and this actually aligns in some ways with my personality type, of people who are intuitively optimistic and risk blind, who like to generate ideas, brainstorm, be creative, and they don't see the problems with their creativity and how this creativity doesn't necessarily align with the broader strategy and organization of the project. So what I tend to do in these sorts of situations, when I come in and find that one member of the team is like that, I tend to pair them, and this person tends to usually be very optimistic, tend to pair them with pessimists who would work with them and not simply knock down their ideas, but help improve their ideas, help that person acknowledge that, hey, some of your ideas are always going to be half-baked, and that's fine. Let's just treat your ideas always as half-baked, not as definitive things, but as suggestions. And then see how this more pessimistic person can work with you to improve some of the ideas into worthwhile projects and discard some of them that are too half-baked, that are third-baked or quarter-baked.
Right.
So work on those. And then at that point, I would, if the projects that are judged worthwhile by the organization, I probably give them to somebody else to finish, because this person is not likely to be able to have the talent to finish them, and that's may not be the best use of his energy or skills.
So in a conversation that would work so the emotions would be is find out the emotional payoff. So maybe his payoff would be being a doer, being a leader, like you said, brainstorming, being like this, seeing himself as this creative visionary, leading us into new victories, right? Type thing. That's the emotional payoff.
Yes.
So the conversation to have with him would be like to kind of identify him in that role. Hey, so and so, I know that you're really good as a leader and a doer, and you're really fantastic with this sort of thing. Right now we've all agreed on these types of goals. These things. I know that you've got the skill sets, and especially with this, being such a great leader and doer, you can really help us make headway into doing this. But some of these things are not that's where I'm kind of getting caught up, because now I'm at the information part.
Sure.
The information would be, however, some of the team are struggling because this thing don't really tie into the major goals, right? And then how to positive reinforcement at the end. Could
Sure.
you?
So I would encourage you to position it as something like, can you describe or think about which of these projects most effectively tie into these goals that you see, and please explain why they most effectively tie it, because you are a visionary leader and you are clearly ahead of the rest of us. I'm not sure I follow your vision. Can you help bring us along?
Right. So that's, see what I like there, and that was why I wanted to have a concrete example for the listeners and for myself as well, is because that's a differentiation where I was going to try to walk them through it. You're going through these steps to let them lead themselves, almost like in a Socratic method, right? Like letting them lead themselves to the conclusion where they might go, well, none of these tie into that goal, right? And then they kind of
right. So that's part of that's part of the rapport. So you kind of establish trust. You show them that you trust them. You trust them to be a visionary leader. And if you know that that's the emotional payoff, that's kind of the benefit they're getting, then you have the shared goals of the projects. Then the rapport is where you're building up trust. You say, hey, I trust you as a visionary leader. Help me understand what you're doing here. And the information part is, more implicit there, where you're asking him to show you where and how these projects tie to these goals. And that might be a time to talk about, resource limitations or so on as part of the information. And so that might be a part of the conversation. But basically, you want them to put it on them to show you, put it on him to show you how these projects tie into the goals and which of these projects tie into the goals the best out of the projects that he describes, and kind of have a conversation about that because of natural resource limitation. I'm sure he knows that.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. That's a great example. Now, how about with long-term goal planning? What are some of the things that people get tripped up on with long-term goal planning? And then what are some tools that we can use to help with that?
So yeah, there's lots of ways that people get tripped up. One of the most fundamental things is planning fallacy. So there was an interesting study conducted where students in the same class, a large class of students, there was one group of students asked, hey, here's this end of term paper. Now, if everything goes perfectly, how long do you think it will take you to do this end of term paper? And they said 6 weeks. And there was another group of students from the same class who were asked, hey, how long do you think that it'll take you to do this end of term paper? And they said 6 weeks.
Right.
So, how likely is it that everything will go perfectly? Very, very unlikely. It's almost a zero probability that there's some, dog will eat your homework, you won't have food, something will break down, get drunk or something. This is college students, right? Not the same thing for a business environment, but I see it all the time in business where people have a project and they don't put in nearly enough money and time to complete the project for unexpected contingencies. They think that everything will go perfectly and they just plan for things to go perfectly. So that's a really huge problem that I see very often with projects. Now, what really helps to address that is to understand that our mind, our gut intuitions, the gut reaction does not recognize problems intuitively. It just doesn't recognize problems. It thinks that our plans will go well. Even when it sees other people's plans go awry, it thinks that our plans will go well. What really helps to address that is a strategy called pre-mortem. So pre-mortem is a strategy where, you heard about the post-mortem, where you look after the fact that what went wrong. Pre-mortem is a strategy where you imagine in advance that the project failed, and then you try to go back and consider all the possible reasons that it failed. Then, once you consider all the possible reasons, that really helps to address the planning fallacy, basically. Because then you're like, okay, it failed. Why did it fail? Let's talk about all the reasons why it failed. You look at all these reasons and you pick the most plausible ones and think, hey, how can I address these problems? How can I prevent them? How can I make sure that these problems don't derail this project? Now, sometimes as a result of doing a pre-mortem with organizations, we figure out that maybe a project shouldn't happen. And that's actually a great outcome. Sometimes, the product shouldn't be launched. You're not ready for it. You might be ready later, but it takes some more time to get ready, to put in things in place that you need to prepare for before you have the project launched. That's a really good strategy. That's a really good outcome. And sometimes you might not want to do the project at all. And that's a surprisingly good outcome if you decide that you don't want to do the project at all. People underestimate the importance and value of the outcome of choosing not to do a project. So just be very clear. That's a really important and positive outcome sometimes. But yes, when you do a pre-mortem, that can really help you address a lot of problems.
And what else? That's the thing that I remember I did a workshop on project management and creating Gantt charts. And that's that whole risk assessment thing. It's really powerful because, like you say, you come up with why might this project not, why it failed, why were the reasons why it failed, make a list of those, and then be like, all right, well, what are we going to do to make sure that this doesn't happen? Or what are we going to do as soon as we feel this is happening? And then it also lets you adjust your time schedule for how long things will take, and have those plans in place. And like you say, it's a hard thing to do. It's a really hard thing to do. And I know we're, especially this day and age, we're in such a world of self-gratification. But people don't appreciate the time they're walking down the street and they turn left instead of right, so they didn't get hit by a car. It's hard to appreciate the bullets that were shot at you that didn't hit, because they didn't hit you for you to really, to feel that pain. And so, like what you say, if you go through this and you're like, it failed, instead of just hoping for the best, like go through the project. Why might it fail? What would be the causes? Let's put up some contingencies in place now. And if it's too hard or too costly or too expensive to make it work in a worst case scenario, it might be better to walk away or think of a simpler way to do it. Just chew it on for a while, chew on the idea for a while, because again, it's so much better. I mean, it's like exercise. Like injuries are the worst thing. I hate injuries. Even when I was doing martial arts, we used to say that injuries are the real enemy because they stop your training. They can inhibit your mobility and your confidence, and they can create fear in your mind where it didn't exist before because of injuries. So it's the same sort of thing. I think like this, like by just being a little more cautious with your projects and planning, you're more likely to be successful. That's a great tool.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's a really good analogy with injuries. And I think it's something that people tend to forget. And one problem with what you're talking about, we don't see the bullets that didn't hit us. There's a psychological phenomenon, one of these cognitive biases is called survivorship bias, where we tend to observe and see the entrepreneurs, the CEOs who are successful. And we tend to not see all the people who are not successful, who failed. They're not visible to us. All the businesses that closed aren't visible to us. All the businesses that could have been aren't visible to us. We don't know them. We're not observing them. We're only seeing the ones who succeeded and we think, oh, we can be like them. Well, we're not seeing all the ones who didn't succeed. They didn't survive for us to have the information about their lack of success. So this is something really important. If we imagine really accurately, rationally, looking at the environment of business, we have to imagine the ghosts of unsuccessful businesses standing all around the successful ones. And that will give us a much more realistic assessment of the dangers that we're working in and help us make much better decisions about putting in time and resources into doing risk assessments of various sorts to prevent disasters.
Well said. Very well said. So you've given us some great tools in just acknowledging our own biases and helping make smarter decisions. And maybe people might feel like it's a lot to go through. Like we talked about the hiring plan. So you might not do it for all things, but if you're going to buy a house, if you're going to buy a car, if you're going to buy a staff member, like hire someone, take on an important, potentially a heavy weighted decision that has long-term implications and consequences. Maybe these are some tools that you may want to consider thinking of using. Like we discussed, we talked about it in a situation of hiring someone. It could be applied to anything, taking on a new partner for your business, anything such as that. We also talked about how to communicate when there's a breakdown in communication and either we are the one with the cognitive bias or we're the one that's got some sort of that have shut down or are refusing to acknowledge reality, or if there's someone else that's not accepting reality as it were. And then we also talked about planning and project management and some tools to help us be more successful with our plans and our goals. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you about?
No, I think that was great. And one thing I would add is that while the things that we've talked about, the decision making is wiki decisions. If you go through the book, The Truth Seeker's Handbook, a science-based guide, thing is you pick up mental motions that can help you in any sort of situation. You can make quick decisions. Do I buy that desk or do I not buy the desk? If you learn the mental motions behind the more complex decision making, you can very quickly think, what are the criteria I'm looking for in a desk? You don't just go with, this desk looks nice. You think, okay, here are the three criteria. Here are which of these is more important, which of these is the least important. Let me rate the desks here in the store on these three criteria and evaluate very quickly which desk I want for my office.
Yeah.
Very easy.
And especially quick. We didn't talk about it all, but you mentioned like the elephant versus the elephant rider. And I think helping people understanding kind of how their mind operates, that a large percent of your brain is just an emotional kind of reacting thing. And then there's a small part of it that kind of helps steer and control and is more rational and analytical. And you might be able to assess if you're in a situation. If you're in a situation, this is often common at conferences and such, where they try to create a buyer frenzy. Are you caught up in the moment? Are you being taken for a ride by the elephant, or are you driving the elephant where you want it to go? And so you'll find some tips in the book as well on that and how to recognize those moments that you're in and differentiate between the two.
Absolutely. And that's one of the really important things, that conferences didn't exist in the savannah environment.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
So this is a time to, anytime you're in an environment that's not like the savannah environment, it's time to be more cautious and not trust your gut.
Because you never even know when people might be using these against you. I've been to conferences where I know they were about to make a large dollar offer, like multi-$1,000 offer from the front of the stage. And I went to a few of this gentleman's conferences, and I noticed a pattern that every time before he made the pitch for this thing, the temperature in the room would drop to below comfortable. And it was because once he made the command to go, if you're interested, to the back of the room and fill it up, nobody wants to be in the room because everybody's frozen. So everybody stands up, which creates, right? It triggers the people that were already on the fence, creates a scarcity, an impression of scarcity. I mean, there's ways people use this stuff against you that you aren't even aware of. It really is, whether they're con men or whether they're just legitimate business people that are just helping you overcome yourself. You know, a lot of this is, in some ways, that's also necessary. I mean, that's part of selling, is helping people overcome their own mental biases to come to a rational decision that your product or service is what they need and will help them, and that they're really stuck in a fear mindset right now, or a scarcity mindset. Sometimes that happens. Someone's income gets cut by half, and suddenly they're in this scarcity mindset, and so they're kind of clawing at straws everywhere they can, and they're really sensitive to anything that maybe they wouldn't be if they weren't in that sort of scenario. So definitely check out the book. You can find this book, The Truth Seeker's Handbook, and others at Gleb Tspursky. Forgive me if I didn't pronounce that right. GLEBTSIPURSKY.com. Once again, that is Gleb TSIPURSKY.com. Or I'm assuming, are you on all the other channels like Amazon and all that stuff? Yeah. Perfect.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. You can find the Truth Seeker's Handbook, a science-based guide on Amazon, as well as on my
Perfect.
website.
There you go. So check those out, Gleb. Thank you again. It's always super informative and very practical and real world, has real world implications and applications. I think it's fantastic. If anybody enjoyed this call, you definitely want to listen to our previous interview we did. It's on a different vein, but similar topic, and full like this, full of really good, actionable, applicable things that can help make your life and your business run better. So Gleb, thank you so much for joining us, my friend. It's always an honor and a pleasure. I appreciate you, and thank you for coming and sharing with my audience.
Thank you so much, Daryl. It's always a pleasure to be on with you as well.
You've reached the end of our interview. Now, first, let me thank you for listening. I appreciate and respect you more than you'll ever know. And now I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. First, what 3 lessons did you just learn? What 3 aha moments just jumped out at you? Second, what can you implement for yourself and your business in the next 24 hours? Third, what can you give to someone else to help you with, or give to them to just do it for you? Whatever it is, remember, taking action is the secret sauce to results. Now, if you think this interview would be helpful for a friend, please give them a link to it. It'll help them and it'll help me too. I'd also like to invite you to help me find out more about the challenges you're facing, your dreams, your goals, and how I can help you overcome what's holding you back. We both do better when we know better, and your success is my success. So please reach out and interact. You can visit our website, bestbusinesscoach.ca for Canada or California, where I'm from and where I'm living. You're welcome to also try out one of our paid programs. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, and pretty much every other social media channel you can think of. You should also subscribe to the podcast, and if you're enjoying them, please leave us a nice review. It really helps. That's all for now. Once again, thank you. Take care of yourself, and remember, the world needs the best business you can build. And I believe in you.
So look, I was privileged enough to sit in the room the other day and listen to Daryl present.
I had the great fortune to spend some time with Daryl Abrinsky during this week, and we had an incredible 2.5-hour presentation from Daryl.
Daryl was amazing. I got so many little nuggets of wisdom.
I hadn't heard Daryl speak before, but what struck me from his presentation was
He's one of these hidden masters in the internet marketing world who's worked on some pretty incredible launches.
Daryl has a ridiculous amount of knowledge.
Daryl Abrinsky's presentation was absolutely great. I really loved
an incredible knowledge of numbers. He is a very articulate, very knowledgeable, very advanced marketer.
Well, he talked a lot about keyword tools and how to research your niche.
So it really created a lot of predictability around moving forwards in our business with the marketing and sales aspect, which is so important to any business to really see it grow.
Where he walks you through step by step
how to judge in detailed form how much money you could potentially make from a market based on AdWords, keyword research, and putting together quite complex Excel spreadsheets
loved it. And what I took away from it is not only understanding your niche market, but also looking at and breaking down and going, am I working with the right niche? Is there enough demand there for me to be able to reach my goals? And doing that hard research.
There's a lot of gurus out there that present you a lot of the why and the what, but they don't necessarily give you the how. And what I really found with Daryl's presentation, there's no holding back. There was no holding back the screens or the curtains. Like, everything was given to really assist us.
His feasibility and due diligence is incredible, and he was able to show us in a really short space of time how to cut through the overwhelm.
You're giving us the exact tools that we can use to test something before we even go to start testing it by spending money on it.
One of the biggest nuggets that I got out of his presentation was that when people pay, they pay attention, and when people pay a lot, they pay a lot of attention. I just love that. I think that's a great way to look at how to price yourself.
And he was a great speaker, lots of energy, and it was really great to spend time with him.
Honestly, phenomenal presentation.
I would love to catch up with him, next time I'm in this part of the world.